Let us continue with chapter 11. But she never cried. Proclamation was made to all the kingdom that whoever could discover the cause of the lake's disease and decrease would be rewarded after a princely fashion. Humdrum and Copycat applied themselves to their physics and their metaphysics, but in vain. Not even they could suggest a cause. Now the fact was that the old princess was at the root of the mischief. When she heard that her niece found more pleasure in water than anyone else out of it, she went into a rage and cursed herself for her want of foresight. But, said she, I will soon set all right. The king and the people shall die of thirst, their brains shall boil and frizzle in their skulls before I lose my revenge. She laughed, a ferocious laugh that made the hairs on the back of her black cat stand erect with terror. Then she went to an old chest in the room, and opening it, took out what looked like a piece of dried seaweed. This she threw into a tub of water. Then she threw some powder into the water, and stirred it with her bare arm, muttering over words of hideous sound, and yet more hideous import. Then she set the tub aside, and took from the chest a huge bunch of 100 rusty keys, that clattered in her shaking hands. Then she sat down and proceeded to oil them all. Before she had finished, out from the tub, the water of which had kept on a slow motion ever since she had ceased stirring it, came to a head and half the body of a huge grey snake. But the witch did not look around. It grew out of the tub, waving itself backwards and forwards with a slow horizontal motion till it reached the princess, when it laid its head upon her shoulder and gave a low hiss in her ear. She started, but with joy, and seeing the head resting on her shoulder, drew it towards her and kissed it. Then she drew it all out of the tub and wound it around her body. It was one of those dreadful creatures which few have ever beheld, the white snakes of darkness. Then she took the keys and went down to her cellar, and as she unlocked the door, she said to herself, "This is worth living for." Locking the door behind her, she descended a few steps into the cellar, and crossing it, unlocked another door into a dark, narrow passage. She locked this also behind her, and descended a few more steps. If anyone had followed the witch princess, he would have heard her unlock exactly 100 doors and descend a few steps after unlocking each. When she had unlocked the last, she entered a vast cave, the roof of which was supported by a huge natural pillar of rock. Now this roof was on the underside of the bottom of the lake. That she untwined the snake from her body and held it by the tail high above her. The hideous creature stretched its head up toward the roof of the cavern, which it then was just able to reach. It then began to move its head backwards and forwards with a slow oscillating motion, as if looking for something. At the same moment, the witch began to walk around the cavern, coming nearer and nearer to the center every circuit, while the head of the snake described the same path over the roof that she did on the floor. For she kept holding it up, and still it kept slowly oscillating. Round and round the cavern they went, ever lessening the circuit, till at last the snake made a sudden dart, and clung to the roof with its mouth. "That's right, my beauty," cried the princess. "Drain it dry." She let it go, left it hanging, and sat down on a great stone, with the black cat which had followed her all the way around the cave by her side. Then she began to knit and utter awful words. The snake hung like a huge leech, sucking at the stone. The cat stood with his back arched and his tail like a piece of cable, looking up at the snake. And the old woman sat knitted and muttered. 7 days and 7 nights they remained thus, when suddenly the serpent dropped from the floor as if exhausted, and shriveled up till it was like a piece of dried seaweed. The witch started to her feet, picked it up, put it in her pocket, and looked up at the roof. One drop of water was trembling on the spot where the snake had been sucking. As soon as she saw that, she turned and fled, followed by her cat. Shutting the door in a terrible hurry, she locked it, and having muttered some frightful words, sped to the next, which she also locked and muttered over, and so with all 100 doors, till she arrived in her own cellar. Then she sat down on the floor ready to faint, but listening with malicious delight to the rushing of the water, which she could hear distinctly through the 100 doors. But this was not enough. Now that she had tasted revenge, she'd lost her patience. Without further measure, the lake would be too long in disappearing. So the next night, when the last shred of the dying old moon rising, she took some of the water in which she had revived the snake, put it in a bottle, and set out, accompanied by her cat. Before morning, she had made the entire circuit of the lake, muttering fearful words, crossed every stream, casting into it some of the water out of her bottle. When she had finished the circuit, she muttered yet again, and flung a handful of water towards the moon. Thereupon every spring in the country ceased to throb and bubble, dying away like the pulse of a dying man. The next day there was no sound of falling water to be heard across the borders of the lake, and the very courses were dry, and the mountains showed no silvery streaks down their dark sides. And not alone had the fountains of Mother Earth ceased to flow, for all the babies throughout the country were crying dreadfully, only without tears. Chapter 12. Where is the prince? Never since the night when the princess left so abruptly had the prince had a single interview with her. He had seen her once or twice in the lake, but as far as he could discover, she had not been in it any more at night. He had sat and sung and looked in vain for his nereid, while she, like a true nereid, was wasting away with her lake, sinking as it sank, withering as it dried. When at length he discovered the change that was taking place in the level of water, he was in great alarm and perplexity. He could not tell whether the lake was dying because the lady had forsaken it, or whether the lady would not come because the lake had begun to sink. But he resolved to know so much at least. He disguised himself, and going into the palace, requested to see the Lord Chamberlain. His appearance was at once granted at his request, and the Lord Chamberlain, being a man of some insight, perceived that there was more of the prince's solicitation than met the ear. He felt likewise that no one should tell whence the solution of a present difficulty might arise. So he granted the prince's prayer and made shoe-black to the princess. It was rather cunning in the prince to request such an easy post, for the princess could not possibly soil as many shoes as the other princesses. As soon as he learned all that he could about the princess, he went nearly distracted. But after roaming about the lake for days and diving into every depth there remained, all he could do was put extra shoe polish on a dainty pair of boots that was never called for. But the princess kept her room with the curtains drawn to shut out the dying lake. But she could not shut it out of her mind for a moment. It haunted her imagination, so that she felt as if the lake were her soul, drying up within her, first to mud, then to madness, then to death. She thus brooded over the change, with its dreadful accompaniments, till she was nearly distracted. As for the prince, she had forgotten him. Oh, however much she had enjoyed his company in the water, she did not care for him without it. But she seemed to have forgotten her father and mother, too. The lake went on sinking. Again, small slimy spots began to appear, which glittered steadily amidst the changeful shine of the water. These grew to broad patches of mud, which widened and spread, with rocks here and there, and floundering fishes and crawling eels swarming. The people went anywhere catching these, and looking for anything that might have dropped from the royal boats. At length the lake was all but gone, only the few of the deepest pools remained unexhausted. It happened one day that a party of youngsters found themselves on the brink of one of these pools in the very centre of the lake. It was a rocky basin of considerable depth. Looking in, they saw at the bottom something that shone yellow in the sun. The little boy jumped in and dived for it. It was a plate of gold covering with writing. It carried the words to the king. They carried it to the king. On one side were these words: "Death alone from death can save. Love is death, and so is brave. Love can fill the deepest lake. Love loves on beneath the wave." Now this was enigmatical enough to the king and courtiers, but the reverse of the plate explained it a little. Its writing amounted to this: if the lake should disappear, they must find the hole through which the water ran, but it would be useless to try and stop it by any ordinary means. There is but one effectual mode: the body of a living man alone could staunch the flow. The man must give himself on his own will, and the lake must take his life as it filled. Otherwise the offering would be of no avail. If this nation could not provide one hero, it was time it should perish. Alright, that's the end of chapter 12. I love you, Christy. Sleep on, keep calm, find a llama, carry on, and I'll be home soon. I love you, Christy. Good night.